Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Welcome back to The Law Show. Sterling Fox with you, joined in studio today by Scott Stanley and Bill Dick from the law firm Murphy Battista LLP, a Vancouver and now Kelowna-based personal injury law firm. Bill being the tip of the spear in Kelowna for all of about 2 months now.
That's right.
And already busy. No shortage of business, unfortunately, I suppose, is there?
No, unfortunately, personal injury lawyers are busy.
Yeah. Wanted to talk, if you don't mind, I'd like to continue on this sports theme. It's Sunday, a lot of soccer games going. The baseball registration signs are up at community centers already. So when kids sign up for sports, guys, one of the things that parents grumble and grouch about in terms of costs, aside from the gear and the ice or field time, is the insurance premium. So, Scott, when my kid signs up for hockey or soccer, I get all sorts of forms and consent and permission and all the rest of it, and I pay for insurance premiums. What am I paying for?
Well, you're paying for liability insurance, mostly for the coaches, right? If the coaches are sued, or you're basically funding those things. But one of the things you're also buying is insurance for your child in the event they're injured. Remember back in the day when you would go to school and you break your finger on the school ground, you get $500 or whatever that would be.
And we had those forms at the beginning of the year that you had to bring. And so we all knew, hey, you break your arm, it's $700.
What a deal.
Yeah, such a deal. All you had to do was be incapacitated for 3 months. But I remember that stuff. Is that still out there?
They have similar policies like that for minor hockey players. And I had occasion to look at one 6 months ago, and I was shocked to see that one of the things not covered is concussions. Now, that may have changed, and I may not have been looking at something current, but the document that I was looking at indicated there was no coverage for concussions.
Did it specifically say no coverage for concussions?
Well, it wouldn't have provided any coverage for no concussions. It wasn't among the things listed.
So by elimination, therefore, if it's not listed, it doesn't exist.
And I would think as a parent that would be the thing that would cause me the most concern.
Okay. So are these insurance packages, Bill, or coverage policies that they draw up for kids' sports worth the paper they're written on?
Well, I mean, they're something. It's better than nothing,
I suppose.
But for the most,
we parents, we get this sort of, well, I signed the permission forms and there's insurance here, so we're good. Go off you go, Junior. Yeah. So is it true?
Well, I think a lot of people don't read the fine print of insurance policies.
We never do.
We never do, although you're expected to. But you would read them, and you would find that there is some amount of money that will be provided for broken bones and more severe injuries. But the things like Scott said, concussions, brain injuries, you might not have any compensation for that. Probably because insurance companies would end up going broke.
I suppose. But we're talking about some of the professional level sports, and we didn't use him by name, but when we were talking about sports concussion injuries, I was thinking of Eric Lindros, the former Philadelphia Flyer, who had to give up an incredibly promising career very early on because of a series of concussions that finally literally took him out of the game. And he's certainly not the only one, Scott.
Well, if you have time, viewers, go Google Scott Stevens, Eric Lindros. It's just the most violent hit, and that was the beginning of the end for Eric Lindros. And he was treated a lot differently than Sidney Crosby was 20 years later.
Right.
And of course, Eric, I think, his contention is that he was forced and pressured to get back into the lineup. He did. He sustained further concussions in short succession, whereas Sidney Crosby was kept out for over a year, I think. Mm-hmm. And, of course, he's resumed play.
Well, no, but he had long periods of absence in which his team was forced to deal and carry on without the marquee player. And, gosh, imagine, they won more games than they lost. Amazing how these things happen, Bill, when you take the lie out of the equation. The lie being that marquee player has to be on the field or on the ice at all times. Otherwise, people won't buy tickets and come to our games.
Yeah, there's tremendous economic pressure. And the reality is that over the last 20 years, there's been way more studies done on concussions. And in professional sports and just amateur sports, there are now protocols in place where you can't go back on the ice until you are absolutely symptom-free.
But parents are pretty skittish about sports and organized sports. I know some parents who just won't, for example, entertain the notion of their children playing hockey. It's just, in their minds, too dangerous, and I put that in quotes. Maybe they never played themselves, but, I've read all that stuff, and my son's not going to play. I'm not going to put my child at that risk. Well, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, the other side of the coin is I've represented a few young hockey players and who have been involved in motor vehicle accidents, and including some who played professionally. And the atmosphere within amateur sports is these young players may have concussions, but they actually won't tell their coaches.
Right.
Because they'll be kept out and they want to play. And so they actually will minimize their symptoms, or actually won't tell doctors or trainers that they've been injured, because there's so much pressure that they put on themselves, because they don't want to be kept out of the lineup.
Sure.
And that is incredible to me.
And that's the opposite of the Lindros situation, Scott, isn't it? Because Lindros knew he had problems, and then he ran into Bobby Clark, his general manager, and the rest of the Flyers organization, who said, "Oh, stop being such a wimp. Get out there and play. Come on, suck it up, princess. Go to work. Do your job."
Well, and again, I think those discussions would have been a lot different had they taken place 20 years into the future, because there's just more information.
Right. And this, though, is unfortunately, I think, where a lot of people are missing some, I think, because they're relating to those unfortunate experiences of years gone by where players were severely damaged and got very little, if any, compensation for it, and don't realize that in the ensuing years there have been significant changes, Bill, and that it's much easier to have your child in organized sports because of the safeguards now included.
Well, what's even more interesting, and this is the law show, is how tort and litigation can actually promote significant good change in terms of how people practice.
A few well-placed lawsuits turns heads, right?
Well, not only that, is it makes organizations and manufacturers of helmets more accountable, and it changes the way that they practice and put in procedures and policies in place.
Interesting.
And so it can affect real positive change in our society.
Right. And you mentioned, Scott, during the break that Barack Obama, who has two daughters, has told the world that if he had two sons, he wouldn't let them play football. What a knock on the sport that is America's number one, when the President of the United States says, if I had kids, they wouldn't play. And so he's reflecting what a lot of Canadian parents are saying about hockey and other sports up here.
Yeah, I think it's very telling. He must have had an approval rating north of 70 points when he said that. But I think that is very telling. And Bill raises a good point. A lot of the awareness that we have with sports, it all traces back to tort responsibility. I mean, personal injury lawyers, I think, were responsible for getting the Ford Pinto off the road.
Right, okay. And torts, by the way, the law show, we got to get these definitions on the radio. A tort is simply a legal term for a lawsuit, right, Bill?
That's right. And there's a famous case against the Vancouver Canucks Robitaille.
Mike Robitaille, sure.
Mike Robitaille.
Okay.
And I think as a result of his successful claim against the Vancouver Canucks for their doctors inadequately dealing with his injuries.
Can you refresh our memories?
I can't remember the exact injury, but I remember that he was forced to go back and play, and they misdiagnosed his injury,
right,
and it ended his career.
Right.
And he was successful in bringing his claim against the organization. And I think it raised a lot of awareness of professional sports teams that their doctors and the people who are involved have a duty of care, ultimately to ensure that these athletes who they make a tremendous amount of money from, are treated fairly.
So a parent says, okay, this hockey thing, it's just too dangerous for my kid. I'm going to put him or her, and girls hockey is now a big thing, I'm going to put that child into something a little more, a little less dangerous, like maybe, horseback riding or something, gentle and easy. Now, Bill, you sit on a board of directors of a brain trust,
right,
and you are, I think, surprised more, and you will surprise more than a few of our listeners. Talk to us about equestrian injuries. That very safe and gentle sport of horseback riding is not without risk.
Well, particularly, I mean, my own view is I worked on a cattle ranch, and so I'm familiar with horses, and they're like riding rabbits at times. They're just very nervous animals, and are unpredictable. They're wild animals, and so people get involved in trail riding, for example, in these little places up in Langley or Manning Park, and you'll see these flashy BC tourism brochures where everyone's riding with cowboy hats.
Yes.
They're not riding with helmets. And unfortunately, horses will bolt, and people will fall off.
Especially amateur riders.
Amateur riders have never ridden before.
Sure. Yeah.
And they'll fall off. And helmets are not mandatory for trail riding in the province of British Columbia, unlike Ontario. And this is, again, a young girl was riding a horse in Ontario, and she fell off, and she died. And as a result of that tragedy, the government was petitioned by the family and people who are involved in trail organizations, and it's now mandatory for anyone under the age of 19 in Ontario to wear a helmet when they trail ride. It's not in British Columbia.
So we know that riders in BC will, in the competitive equestrian events, the jumping and the dressage, and they all wear a nice looking, but nonetheless a fully protective helmet.
Yes.
So that's obligatory in that competitive environment.
It is.
But to just go out for a ride on a ranch on a sunny afternoon, there's no compulsion at all to put on a helmet.
No, most trail riding organizations will have helmets that are available if you want them. But it doesn't look like a cowboy when you have a hockey helmet on or a proper riding helmet. But I can tell you from my own experience, if you are a parent or a grandparent and you want to take your child out for a ride in the park, go for the helmet.
Having said that, though, what a helmet will not prevent a brain injury.
Right.
It'll help minimize the probability of it. I mean, you got to look at pro football, which I think is the highest sporting activity that produces concussions, and they're all wearing highly engineered helmets.
Exactly, yeah.
And the injuries they're sustaining are concussions. And I mean, we obviously have a lot of cases where we have to, like motorcycle cases where a person sustains a concussion, we retain biomechanical engineers and we say, well, look, had the person been wearing a helmet, would this have made any difference? And often their opinion is, no, it wouldn't have.
Okay.
Because a concussion is not caused by a blunt blow to the head. In fact, you can sustain a concussion by just having your head whip back and forth, because a concussion is caused by the transfer of energy within your brain. Your brain has pieces of it that have different densities than the other pieces, and it just causes micro tearing. So your head doesn't have to hit anything for there to be a concussion. What a helmet does is it prevents there from being a blunt trauma to the head.
Okay, a quick question here before we take the break. Let's use this trail riding example and get into the law side of it all. If I'm out with my grandson, I wish I had one, not yet, still working on that, but if I'm out with my grandson and we go for a trail ride, and I love trail rides, so I take the squirt out for a ride, and we're offered the helmet, and I'm stupid, and I say no because he looks really cute in his cowboy hat, and so do I, and we're going to get a bunch of pictures taken together, and he falls off, and he's injured, and I'm mad, and I want to sue somebody. Because I declined the helmet in the first place, have I lost any legal leg to stand on?
Well, it's ultimately not your claim. It would be the claim for the child.
Okay.
And so the one thing about trail riding is, as an adult, we all sign waivers. And most trail riding organizations.
That's true. Yeah.
will
I've
have a
forgotten
waiver.
about that. Yeah, right.
And waivers don't apply to anyone under the age of 19. So the child would still have the ability to sue the trail riding organization. And unfortunately, could potentially sue you.
Really? And because the helmet was offered and declined, how does that color the ability of you, the lawyer, Scott, to win that case?
Well, it probably wouldn't impact it at all, because the child, depending upon how old they are, the child, if they were sufficient age, they may be held partially responsible for not insisting upon a helmet. But it's not going to prevent the lawsuit from proceeding. Bill's correct. The entity that provided the horse, experience, is probably potentially liable, as is the grandfather or grandmother for failing to insist on a helmet.
So I assume then all of these riding organizations and trailblazer places have group liability insurance, and they pay their premiums every month on time.
They do. What's interesting is, again, it's the change in our society in terms of what it is that we expect. There is a case that was maybe 15 years old where a trail riding outfit was sued, and the question was whether it was standard within the industry for them to make helmet use mandatory. And the judge said no, it wasn't. No one makes it mandatory, and they weren't liable. as a result of that.
Interesting.
What's happened over the course of time is that more and more of these trail riding outfits or their insurers are saying, make it mandatory for
we won't cover you unless you include a mandatory helmet thing, especially for persons under 19. Might that be a demand by an insurance company, Scott? It's not out of the park, is it?
It's not. I mean, I think, for example, people that insure ski hills, the ski hills in BC do a fabulous job of promoting safely. Like Whistler Blackcomb is a world leader in my view.
You bet.
And, if you're going to hit a lift on Whistler Blackcomb, you're going to feel like the scourge of the earth if you're hopping on a ski lift with your kid and neither of you have a helmet.
Right.
And they do a really good job of, promoting that culture that you should be wearing helmets and what have you.
Okay. Must take a quick break. You're listening to The Law Show. Our guests from the personal injury law firm Murphy Battista LLP here in Vancouver. They're downtown on the 20th floor at 650 West Georgia and online at murphybattista.com. And let me give you a little clue as you're looking it up. Murphy is fine. Battista is BATTISTA.com. Back with more after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.